Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and we are here at KubeCon in Detroit. And today we have with us once again Brian Seguin, Managing Director at Qarik. Brian, it's great to have you on the show.
Swap, I'm so happy to be here in person finally. We've been doing these remotely for a couple of years, and it's just great to be in person at a conference. So thank you for having me.
Which also brings me to the first question today to you is that we are here at an in-person conference where we are also talking about Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes. So talk a bit about what has been your experience so far here.
We started the conference out, or I started the conference out by attending Cloud Foundry Day, which was fantastic. The first in-person CF event in years. And there was a lot of good changes that were happening there. We're seeing some changes in this Cloud Foundry ecosystem. A lot of customers are starting to evaluate kind of what's next. You know, there's so much buzz and hype around Kubernetes. A lot of them are kind of bucketing into three main categories. Do they stay on Cloud Foundry for the next few years and wait for some magical new software to come out that automatically migrates them? I mean, I'm sure VMware would love to have that. I would love to have that. Or do they migrate to Kubernetes, which has a lot of complications, a lot of issues? Or do they move to a different Cloud Foundry distribution, to save on some of their costs that they're spending on their platform? That's kind of where we're seeing customers. And what it's actually asking the question is, how do they want to shift the complexity of, because there's an actual shift of complexity if they are moving to Kubernetes from the platform team who currently owns the complexity in the Cloud Foundry space to the developer who's going to start owning more of the complexity from the deployment space if they're operating in a Kubernetes world. So these are all the questions that we're seeing our customers ask, and just a little bit about the industry context.
If I just go back and just talk about Cloud Foundry,
Yes.
There are a lot of folks who are on classic Cloud Foundry. They have made a lot of investment there. They're also, as you rightly said, also looking at what's next, because there is always industry is evolving, so they're looking at what's next. So talk a bit about the state of Cloud Foundry industry from the perspective of the customers wherever they are in their journey.
Cloud Foundry is still running at massive scale in, I think, 50% of the Fortune 2000 companies with mission-critical workloads. It is a massive effort to migrate those workloads off. So, and with some of the announcements at the Cloud Foundry days is Cloud Foundry is not going away. VMware is going to be continuing releases, at least for the next 5 years, which gives a lot of people time to evaluate what they want to do next, which we're starting to see as more of a, customers are starting to ask, well, how do we think more about the developer experience? Cloud Foundry had such a wonderful developer experience. How do we translate that into the Kubernetes world? We still have a large percentage of the Fortune 2000 having mission-critical application workloads on Cloud Foundry, which is fantastic because there's so much value there in the global economy. So we're seeing a lot of companies actually look at what Cloud Foundry is, and they're realizing the value that they have, but they're also understanding, what do we need to do next? How do we figure out, how do we get the talent for the next phase of things? How do we get the next developer experience? What do we do next?
The fact is that Cloud Foundry came out of pivotal. VMware has big investment, but a lot of movement is happening in the industry either way, right? The Cloud Foundry industry, and then VMware is in the process of being acquired by Broadcom. I was at VMware Explorer, I talked to them, because customers, ecosystem, open source, they have concern, what will happen to Tanzu, what will happen to PCF? So those concerns are, sometimes genuine, because when the acquisition happens, you cannot say a lot what will happen, no matter what confidence you have. So when you talk to customer, what kind of fear, concern you see, and how they are approaching a potential future, maybe life after Tanzu or PCF?
Well, there are a lot of fears for customers, in the acquisition of Broadcom of VMware, and they're all wondering, should we maintain these mission-critical applications on top of this platform that may be going away in some period of time in the future? I mean, there's so many mission-critical applications that are on top of these Cloud Foundry platforms across the Fortune 2000 companies, and it's non-trivial to migrate them someplace else. So it's going to take a lot of these organizations years to migrate out. Now, the good news is we were at CF Day, right? There's a future of Cloud Foundry for the next 3 to 5 years. So there's no rush. But if you're going to migrate 10,000 or more applications off of Cloud Foundry, you want to have time to do it right. So we're seeing companies evaluate the workloads. We're seeing them take a holistic approach and figure out, what is the developer experience? What is the developer productivity? How do they actually start to mimic some of the developer productivity in other tool chains that are out there? Whether it be serverless, whether it be, in Kubernetes land or some form of edge compute. That's kind of what we're seeing.
As you also earlier said, the folks are looking at what's next. And that's always the case in the industry. Companies always look at what's the next technology. So all those folks who have invested in Cloud Foundry, they're coming from Cloud Foundry. How can they make Kubernetes as a desired destination for the workloads? And where a company like Qarik, you folk make it easier for them. So that journey, that transition is very smooth for them.
Well, the first step is to document the metrics. Take a baseline. What's your current, going back to that holistic developer productivity, take a baseline of some key metrics like what's your average time to deployment, how much time are your developers spending on actually doing the application deployments, how many deployments do you do per week, and how many applications have you not deployed in the last 30 days. Those are some key metrics. And it's actually really interesting when you start to dig into some of these workloads and you find out that 80% or more of these applications have actually been abandoned and don't have application teams assigned to them. So if you're actually going to look at what the future state is for the platform, there's just a little bit of documentation on a housekeeping standpoint that needs to be done. And we're seeing strong industry leaders starting there. Once they establish the baseline, they actually start to see, okay, what are the different workloads that maybe should stay on Cloud Foundry, and which ones are, the right workloads to move to a Kubernetes or another infrastructure, And so what we actually do is we work with our clients to try to classify some of the workloads. Does this make sense to move to edge compute, or does this make sense to move to some form of serverless, or are there different other technologies out there that we need to incorporate into this, such as Backstage, or how do we incorporate a single pane of glass to make the developer productivity better in a Kubernetes ecosystem? So a lot of the things we are mimicking, some of the things in Cloud Foundry from a developer productivity standpoint, and then a lot of things that we're actually looking at, should these workloads work better someplace else? Sometimes that's 20% of the workloads are key to the core business, and those are the ones that actually need to be upgraded, moved, and invested in. So we first take a focus on that.
If we just look at Qarik, and as you once again earlier said, that Cloud Foundry is very strong when it comes to developer experience. Kubernetes is a totally different world. So how do you folks kind of enable developer still have that developer experience when they are migrating things from Cloud Foundry to Kubernetes?
Once you've classified the workloads, you also have to understand the team classifications, right? And how do you also build a culture and organization to have, for lack of a better way to say this, cross-pollination amongst teams? And how do we embed people into their teams to have them actually identify what the developers actually need, and then take those developers who have identified that and bring them over to a new team to have them accelerate? We kind of call this the lighthouse model, where you train these beacons of light throughout the organization that can spread new technology, new ideas.
As your customers are evolving, that's also you folks are, kind of help them in their journey. So talk a bit about, what work you folks are doing in the Kubernetes space to help those customers who are coming from the Cloud Foundry to Kubernetes, so you can help them with their journey.
In the Kubernetes space, we're helping to accelerate developer productivity and help to accelerate workloads migrating, honestly, off of Cloud Foundry into Kubernetes. We're working alongside customers to modernize some of the applications. We actually found a number of customers don't have modernized applications on top of Cloud Foundry. They kind of shoehorned a few applications in. Those have to all be refactored. Cloud Foundry also has different deployment paradigms. But we're also using different tooling out there to try to create single pane of glass views inside of Kubernetes. I know that there's some really cool things happening with different pipeline automation tooling, different testing tooling, and we're also helping with some data science acceleration things, because if you can redeploy the applications and you're actually working with the business on their business values, you also have to make sure that you're mapping the right data to the business values to deliver a better business picture. I think that's probably the biggest competitive advantage that Qarik has, is they have the leadership that pairs with the business, and that leadership pairs with the business to help integrate technology in the right way that maps business value to actual technical execution.
Brian, thank you so much for sitting down with me. And as you said in the beginning, the energy that we feel when we sit in person with each other is totally different. So thanks for taking time out, sitting with me. I wish we can do more of these in person, but I would love to have you back on the show and talk about the work that the Qarik Group is doing to help Cloud Foundry users continue on their journey, no matter where they are on their journey. So thanks for those insights. And as I said, I would love to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Swap. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to meet you in person. Can't wait for our next chat.